sir?
Let's do a podcast.
All right. Hello and welcome again to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John and I'm joined by my good friend Eddie. How are you doing, buddy?
Episode 29.
29.
29er.
We're almost at 30. Someone was asking on Discord what we're going to do for our 100th episode, and I was like, God, that seems like so far into the future.
All expenses paid trip for host, co-host, and friends and family.
Paid by who?
Paid by
John Kew.
Yeah, that's right.
John Kew Funds.
the slush fund.
That's right.
It's time to do something with it. What's that shirt you got on?
Oh, it's a skateboard shirt. This is Girl Skateboards. Just a company.
Okay.
I ordered a bunch of skateboard T-shirts. I was out. You know, I had a skate shop when I was young with my mom in high school, and I was still wearing
Why does that not
T-shirts
surprise me?
from that skate shop up until a couple of years ago.
All right.
Yeah.
Did it
And
do well?
They all disintegrated. It got me a new car for college, or not new car, a used car, but yeah, helped me get into
Did you
college.
have a ramp inside and everything?
No, we had a ramp in the backyard though, and we did have the video game 720 was the video game. If you remember, it was that one with the circular joystick that just went around in 360s, and you're on a half pipe. Maybe you don't remember. It was a niche video game.
Probably
But
after my time.
that was very cool as a kid. But Eddie, we've got a lot to talk
Yeah,
about today.
let's
So
jump in.
today we're going to talk about some latest news and gear gossip. So website updates, CNBC story about how Lifetime's killing it because of pickleball. New serve rule, another new serve rule in existence in the PPA. A little bit of PPA talk, and then we're going to move on to paddles of the week. So we're talking about the JOOLA 3Ss this week, and maybe, if we have time, we'll talk about the updated thoughts on the Honolulu J2Ti.
Okay.
And some deep diving. Talk about some x-rays I had made of some paddles, and we will also talk about the latest mod of my Ripple R2, Ronbus Ripple R2.
What are we on, mod 4?
Mod 3. Well, I guess it's mod 4 if you talk about the original lead tape setup. Anyway,
All right.
I'm calling it mod 3 because I don't want to seem like a lush. Q&A after that. Let's jump into it, buddy.
Let's get stuck in.
Let's get stuck in. All right, so back to latest news. So some website updates. So I spent the weekend hitting a lot of paddles. You came over at one point to grab the JOOLA 3Ss, and I was in the garage, and we had some fun with the Stalker 3S radar gun.
Yeah, man.
Measuring your spin.
You were definitely bothering the neighbors that day. I was driving up, and I'm still 100 yards away, and I hear this thonk,
Thunk.
thonk.
I wonder how many of my neighbors hate me. I talked to a lot of them. They don't seem to hate me, at least face to face. But
Right.
there was a lot, and I updated the database with 13 new paddles this week. So we've got all the JOOLA 3Ss that I received so far. The Franklin Tour paddles that we talked about last week are now in the database. Spartus Olympus is in there, Honolulu J2Ti, and the Nexus Pro Star. Nice. Also, the modification I'll talk about today of the Ripple R2, I also updated that together with the performance metrics like power and pop. Exciting news for me anyway. The developer, Rich, for the website Data Analytics, just created out of the blue a dashboard for the radar charts that I show on my paddle reviews. So we've got like power, pop, spin, et cetera, going around that 6-prong radar chart. And a lot of people have asked for various versions of that, and if we could get it on the website. So it will be up on the website by the end of the week, probably, maybe by the time this podcast is published, but that's going to be fun. And you can choose any paddle in the database, see the radar chart. You can also stack 3 of those paddles on top of each other to compare how the radar indices stack up among the paddles. So cool stuff there. Several updates. Go ahead,
So, John,
Eddie.
when I came to visit you, I hit a couple of paddles just to kind of see what the Stalker was all about and check out your methodology. And, man, after not even 10 hits, I was feeling like, man, this is kind of hard work. How do you just maintain just consistency in your metrics when you're doing 13 paddles at a clip? I can imagine that's pretty physically taxing.
I don't know. obviously it's physically taxing my wrist. Is,
right.
is
You were
feeling
all
it
bundled
today.
up today.
Yeah. So there's some wear and tear on the joints, but I don't get tired doing that. I can go all day to like hitting balls, hard serves. I do, clearly there's going to be a drop off after a while in terms of intensity. So I try not to stack too many paddles. I want to say like 6 is about the most I do at once. So this weekend, I did like 6 one day, 7 the next day. But I do find that stacking paddles becomes more consistent than doing it on multiple days or spreading it out over the course of a week or two. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're doing the same session, then it's easier to kind of dial in your intensity, and the weather is the same, the temperature is the same, and humidity. All of those are factors. It's not a perfect system, but I have been impressed overall with kind of the ability to compare paddles overall. Like it matches our experience on the court. I'm like, oh, this is a hot paddle, and I get the serve and pop metrics, and it's about where it should be. There's always room for improvement, and hopefully someday I'll be doing exit velocity or COR instead of serves and drop pop volleys. Anyway, so we'll see. We'll see.
Man, your power numbers are higher than mine will ever be.
I don't know. And you're at 60 miles an hour or so on serves.
Not quite.
Yeah. And
Maybe
your spin was
50s.
good too. You got one 2,600 RPM spin.
I think they were all like 3,400 and whatever number that was. It kept popping up as an error.
There's an error on the stalker. Occasionally it just shows a 3,000 number. It's an error, but it's always the same number. Which
feels good. Feels good to get it once in a while.
I mean, it's an error until you're playing with the diadem hush. You're like, that might actually be real. 3,400 RPM. All right, and then several updates to the analytics on the website based on user feedback. So one, we removed the floating numbers on those bar charts because it kind of got cluttery. So now if you kind of hover over the bar with your mouse, you can see the actual numbers, but it disappears to kind of clean up the view.
Improvement.
RPM was removed from the horizontal bar charts because that pushed all of the other. It's such a large value, 2,000 RPM versus, 120 swing weight. It's going to push all those other values down. So we removed that. You can still see it. Something I'll talk about in a second, but now it shows more clearly the division between those bars. And now you can drill into data and you can choose your own metrics to look at. So when you go into the bottom of that dashboard and you can kind of see what metrics are showing, if you hover over that with your mouse, there'll be a option for drill actions, and you click on that and you can choose what metric you want displayed among any of them within the database. So you can play around you can tweak it to your heart's content. I'm pretty excited about that. That's a fun update. So the data analytics are steadily improving. I'm excited to have the radar charts up there and then the ability to choose which metrics you want to analyze.
And hey, the company names are in ascending order now.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Rich jumped right on that from our last podcast.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, next news item. So apparently Lifetime Gym, the stock is up 50%, 56% due to pickleball, which those of us who go there, it's no surprise. I think from our group alone and, this Superior, Lafayette, Boulder County area, especially originally last year, I think we got maybe 40 people at our local Lifetime strictly for pickleball, right? Among our groups. It's kind of thinned out occasionally. Since then, some people have moved to other places, but there's still a good contingent and there's always new people coming in, mostly for pickleball.
I really feel like they're onto a solid formula. Every time you go in there, somebody says hello to you. Mm-hmm. They make you feel welcome. Mm-hmm. And that's true on the pickleball court too. They hire some of the best people as facilitators, as coaches. I just played with John Miller at Westminster and Stuart Gregory. He was up from the Cary, North Carolina facility. Mm-hmm. And we had a great time. And that's not true just for me. That's true for everybody that comes onto a pickleball court at a Lifetime. It's just a very welcoming environment.
For sure. And I've enjoyed it. It's such a premier gym. I also go to 24-Hour Fitness. I've had a membership there, and I got grandfathered into this really sweet deal. But the difference between those two gyms is night and day. 24 hours, literally, I can walk there from my house, and it's a good 15, 20-minute drive over to Lifetime. But I go to when you go into Lifetime, like, okay, this is nice. And you're right, the receptionists are great and kind and great atmosphere. I don't know if I'm going to hold on to my membership, though, because I'm not allowed to film in there anymore for B-roll footage I've talked to various people, too. I even went up to the VP level, and they're just like, we've molded over, and it's our policy now. It's something about how people don't want themselves being filmed inadvertently without their permission and showing up on YouTube, which I understand if you're working out or whatever, that might be an issue. But there's a way I can arrange the cameras on the pickleball courts
that's a pretty short-sighted decision, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. We're driving a lot of
exactly
the big Lifetime logos in the video and everything. So it's unfortunate, but I don't know if I can justify the membership price if I can't shoot video there.
Well, I bet some other club is more than happy to have you.
I'm sure. I'm sure. All right. Another bit of news I was reading, I think I got this from the Dink newsletter, but Realtor magazine analyzed property values in San Francisco, and this is not usually something I would be interested in, but given that it's related to pickleball, and I think it's going to have a big influence on pickleball, because what they found is that property values declined from 10 to 20% if pickleball courts are constructed across the street from a residence due to the noise. And a property 1 or 2 blocks away could potentially see property values decline by 5 to 10%. So now we're talking losing money on homes. So I think that's going to be a real big push for quiet paddles, quiet technology, and pickleball. And not just the crazy powerful stuff like the Diadem Hush, but they're on the right track. But yeah, getting that into...
The closer you are to a court, the higher your, I guess, decrease in property value.
Yeah, even 2 blocks away, you got up to a 10% decline in your property value.
Yeah.
Because people looking to buy the homes.
Now, what if you're a little
bit
farther away, where the noise isn't an issue, but you're still in kind of that walking distance of a pickleball court?
Yeah, they actually analyzed that. So at least 3 blocks away, your property values start to increase, but minimally, from 1 to 5%.
So there's some winners in this game.
There's some winners in the game. Another option is obviously just to build the pickleball courts further away from neighborhoods, but there's within big cities, there's limited space like that.
Yeah. In Denver, they've got some of the worst locations for pickleball courts. Just because of the noise factor, they've had to move pickleball courts around, which is unfortunate, but I guess I get it.
Yeah.
Now, that was, I assume, public courts, like multiple public courts?
Or like a neighborhood. Yeah, public courts, right. Outdoor, obviously.
I wonder if they've done studies about resale value of homes with pickleball courts installed.
I imagine, that's a good question. I imagine it's more of a niche market, but the people who are going to buy it are probably going to pay a little more because they're into pickleball, right?
Yeah, right.
And then all your neighbors are going to hate you because their property values suck.
Unless they're pickleball players too, I suppose.
Right. That's right.
I did see some introduction of some legislation in California where they were thinking about banning private pickleball courts.
Yeah, I saw that too.
So
dug around the same areas, yeah. I guess it makes sense in certain neighborhoods, depending on the composition of the neighborhood and how quiet they want it.
Right. But just a blanket decision like that, I think, is short-sighted. We're coming up on some new technologies that can reduce noise, so why not focus on the noise versus the court itself?
That's true. I think it's going to be a big push to quiet paddle technologies, and I think it's possible to get there with minimal performance, if not zero performance differences than what we're playing with now.
For sure.
Or maybe, adjusting the rules to like they have been for quiet paddles, but in a way that doesn't break the game.
Right.
What's next in news?
Another new serve rule by the PPA is it's a temporary rule, and they're going to judge whether or not it's been effective. So it's confusing at this point, right? There's been so many adjustments to the serve, and the whole goal is to de-weaponize it. So I think the original one was you can only drop it from your hip, and you can't throw it up at all. The ball has to only drop. It can't even be raised slightly.
Right.
People started getting called on that, so they relaxed that a little bit. But that was an attempt to make sure that people were hitting it low. And a lot of pros didn't like that, and it became difficult to enforce because of the relaxation of certain components of it. And then, was it Kansas City where they were just like, screw it, we're going back to the original USAP rules? And Bar just started murdering people with serves. Still, he's figured out a way. If you go back and his serves look illegal on the surface, but if you actually look at it frame by frame, it's following the rules. He's a big dude. His hips are like 5 feet tall, and he can down on the ball with he's got it figured out perfectly. A lot of people didn't like it though, so they went back, and this is their third attempt to de-weaponize the serve. So this one, Eddie, is provisional rule. It'll be reevaluated after 60 days. So the ball must be released downward from the waist area as before. Mm-hmm. A drop from the hand, and the adjustment here is that a drop from the hand can be tossed upward slightly, but only the length of a ball. So it's to account for that natural movement where if this hand is raised and you're spinning your body, there's going to be a little bit of lift on the ball. Okay? But come on.
Good luck.
Can you imagine being a referee and being like,
that was... calls. How are they going to make a...
That was 23.4 millimeters. Right. But anyway, so there's that. And then the swing on the serve must be underhand. So around 45 degrees or less, which that's confusing to me already. Where are we measuring the 45 degrees from? Where's 0? Is 0 vertical? And that's 45? 0 must be 90.
Yeah,
and that's 45. Okay.
But still, again, how are you going to call that versus that?
Yeah, get out the protractor. As Dave Fleming would say.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's another issue. The serves where either the ball is tossed too high or the release of the swing was not clearly in a low to high motion will first result in a service warning and reserve, and then each player is allowed one service warning per match. Subsequent violations will result in a fault. I do think that's the better method than what they were using before, where they were unsure, they called a player, he reserved, they were unsure on that one. It was just like infinite reserves, right? So why not just test the boundaries and start just lowering it slightly each time until the referee gets tired? So I think, that makes more sense, just optic-wise, too, that people aren't reserving
this is just
over
PPA
and over.
Professional.
Just PPA, yeah. So what do you think, Eddie? Do you think it's going to stick around after 60 days?
Nope. I think we're unfortunately moving towards a drop serve scenario.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it makes the most sense. It's the most logically coherent and definitely the easiest to referee.
Yeah. There's been so many rule changes, so many governing bodies with different rules on serves. Everybody thinks they know what the right serve is. Nobody actually does, and it's becoming a problem, not just in tournaments, but in rec play. People are like calling people out for serves that are just fine, but they don't follow some PPA Pro standard, and it's getting a little ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true. I do think that drop serve is in our future, which is not a bad serve. You can still be offensive with a drop serve. I think everybody just thinks that the optics look bad. Yeah. I don't know. I think pros will be able to pull it off and still look athletic.
I think most probably will be able to, but I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, I'm not either. I mean, they do it in padel, but they were allowed to toss the ball a little bit in padel, so it doesn't look so ridiculous. You don't get caught doing like this motion, like standing there. It just looks silly, that's going to be the natural result of the drop serve and pickleball as the rules are written. So we will see. We will see. I think what they should do is maybe this is going to introduce too much confusion, but instead of allowing only a drop, allow a little bit of a toss, but not over maximum height where you can drop it. But then where's the maximum
toss
height
to
where you can drop it?
The top of your head?
Top of the head. That's a good. Excellent. That's it, Eddie. Figured it out. See, you can see, right?
Yeah.
So
within a certain margin of error.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
Let's go. Let's go, USAP. Let's go, PPA.
Now, USAP serve standards have not changed. It's
they haven't.
the same as it always has been.
Right, but they also have something for the drop serve, too, in the regulations. So I think they should change that, too.
All right.
It can only be dropped from
Well, we're on to something.
head level. Tip of the head. I'm going to edit that out, Eddie.
Not anymore, you're not.
All right. So, did you watch much of PPA
I watched
Atlanta?
the ladies.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Did you see any of that?
I saw bits and pieces. Which ones were sticking out for you?
Oh, that the Waters Parenteau
Oh, okay.
versus Anna and Rachel.
Rachel.
Yeah.
Rohrabacher.
Man, that was a freaking war.
It was a war. Yes. That was a good match. I didn't see the whole thing. I came in and bits and pieces of it.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I don't want to get into the details. There's other people that can do that better, but it was fun to watch.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love the competitiveness of the ladies.
And that's the first time Anna Leigh and Catherine lost
Yeah.
in like centuries.
Yeah. I think Anna Leigh is probably dealing with a little bit of an injury, but who cares? It's a loss.
I mean, that doesn't take away from the fact
No.
that Anna Bright and Rachel Rohrabacher put it on them. They came, and all their hard work paid off. You could see it in their eyes. And
Yeah.
just the
It was
gratification of that
Rachel
win was
Rohrabacher
amazing.
1 year ago.
Yeah, right. She is. Anna Bright should be a talent coordinator. Recruiter,
Yeah.
right. She is so good at finding talent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think that means that that's going to reach parity in the women's division anytime soon. I still think Anna Leigh is completely dominant, but I think there is a slight bridging of that gap,
Yep.
which is good.
Yep.
Good for
How
the
about you?
sport.
What did you watch?
Bits and pieces here and there, but mostly I was looking at paddles while the players were playing, and we see a lot of JOOLA pros winning medals. So I was like, how about I tally up how many medals are associated with which paddle, right? So I did that. I might end up doing that.
Gotta give the win to
for
just
each.
the hardware, not the person.
Right. So, conceivably, if Anna Leigh triple crowns, as she's wont to do, then there's going to be 3 entries for paddle tech and the medal division and the medalists, right? So I did that, and I just wanted to see, okay, are the JOOLA Mod 3s, which are ubiquitous among all of the JOOLA pros now. Like if you're a JOOLA pro, you're playing with the Mod 3.
The 3S.
The 3S.
Gotcha.
Oh my God, it's confusing. There's so many versions of this. So yeah, they all switched to them. A couple
One
of them
JOOLA
switched
model
to
for each type of serve.
right. But even Fed, who was on the mod TA15, switched over to the 3S. So they're all playing with the 3S. Must be something about that paddle. Anyway, I was like, does that paddle provide a significant advantage to the JOOLA pros?
All
in the
right.
sense that you might be able to see some patterns in the data. So I did tally it. So what we can see is that women's doubles medalists, 2 of the 6 players who medaled were using the 3S. Men's doubles, 3 of the 6 were using the JOOLA 3S. Mixed doubles, only 1 of the 6 had a 3S. Women's singles, 1 of the 3 had a 3S. Also, men's singles, 1 of the 3. So, 24 of the 24 medalists, 8 used JOOLA 3S paddles, which is 33%. Not overwhelming. And then I thought, well, how do the other brands compare? So let's look. I'll throw up the bar chart, get real nerdy
All right.
on the B-roll. So for PPA Atlanta, there are the number 1 spot for paddles and medalists was JOOLA, all 3S, 8 paddles.
8.
Selkirk and Paddle Tech tied for second, both coming in at 6 paddles each.
That's not bad.
Yeah, not too far behind JOOLA. Franklin came in 4th with 3 paddles. So we've got J-Dub,
Johnson's, right?
Georgia. Who was the third person with the
Hayden?
Franklin paddle? Hayden must have medaled. I think he got bronze.
Okay.
Yeah. 6-0 had 1. Yep, Jiao Mei.
Hey,
Yeah.
all right.
And Pro XR had 1 with Connor. To like my 2-handed backhand imitation. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Connor
Like I
Garnett.
was sitting with him.
So very stacked for 3 brands in particular. So JOOLA, Selkirk, and Paddle Tech. And yes, JOOLA is edging out the other brands.
So next tournament, I think we should do the entire tournament and give paddles a weighting based on, what round you're in. So you're going beyond the medalists, with
Right.
the highest score going to the gold, but some points going to, a round of 32
I like
winner.
it. I like it.
You got
We should
nothing
do
to do. Just do it.
No, seriously, we should consider doing this. Yeah, let us know in the comments if this is interesting to you. To look at kind of paddle trends and
then we'll
success.
play with the top whatever.
Yeah.
And pit them head to head ourselves.
Let's go.
Because it's not the player, it's the paddle.
It's all the paddle.
Always the paddle. Otherwise, we don't have a podcast.
All right, paddles of the week. Speaking of paddles, let's move on to paddles.
Want to talk more about JOOLA? Seems like that would be the thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, for all the controversy and I'm sure, the hurt feelings and just financial mess that JOOLA's going through with the delisting, they sure are getting a lot of attention out of this. And they've got, 3 versions of the same paddle in, 9 different models.
It's insane.
Yeah. So they produce a lot of paddles. So I got a segment of the JOOLA 3S paddle population, and you and I have been hitting with them, and I thought we would discuss, how they hit. But before we talk about that, Chris Olsen on Pickleball Studio broke some news earlier this week about the core of the 3S and how the foam is basically looks the same as the Mod TA15, which looks the same as the Gen-3s, Alphas. All these versions are using the same propulsion core. And we can attest the cliff notes of the play style of these paddles is the 3Ss are definitely more muted than the Gen-3s were, right? So Chris basically asked JOOLA what's going on with this, and he broke the news that for the Gen-3s, they were intentionally crushing the cores a bit. They called it a compressed core. So they would take, for a 16 millimeter paddle, they would cut the core a little larger, let's say 17 millimeters. I don't know exactly what it was. And they put that into the mold, thermoforming mold, and then it would press it down to 16 millimeters, which is trapping some energy in the core. But that leads to the question, well, that's probably why they were breaking, right?
Well, it's at stock. It's already core crushed.
Right. So I reached out to JOOLA also. Chris and I were chatting over the weekend, texting, and he told me the news he got. And then I reached out to them, and I also had a conversation with the product manager, Austin Kim at JOOLA, and got some more information too. So, so let's talk about that. So he did mention that he talked to Chris, gave me the same information. Yes, they did compress the cores in the Gen-3s, but an important bit of this is they also did that in the Gen-2s. So the original Perseus, Scorpius, those paddles.
Which never had a problem.
Well, they also...
Well, as far as listing goes.
The listing, exactly. Yeah, they were never delisted. But they also had issues, as did all thermoform paddles with breakage. And one thing I want to talk about is, there's a lot of terminology in terms of core crushing. Core crushing is the most common terminology. I like to call it core corruption because I feel like that's the where it breaks. That's the point where it breaks when it becomes corrupted. Core crushing, in my mind, a crushed core is not necessarily a broken core. It's definitely on its way to being broken, but you can have a core that still plays and it doesn't have the crunchy sound. It's still controllable. And I think that the majority, definitely in the beginning of the thermoform era, early in 2023, the first half of the year, most of the paddles were condensed in that way, crushed. I don't know if it's purposeful, but that led to a lot of broken paddles, core corrupted paddles. And when I dissected the paddles that I had that were broken, I found that they were disbonded in addition to crushed. So the core was crushed and squishy, and also it led to, given that the core was so squishy, it separated, the epoxy separated from the facing layers also. So you could slide a knife right in between those two, and it was just squishy all around.
So that would be a delamination situation.
Well, delamination technically is the separation between
layers,
the
layer
layers
from the core.
But that layup, the surface layup from the core is called disbonding.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was disbonded, not delaminated. And then also core crushed, core corrupted. A little bit confusing, but yeah, I think that clearly, and kudos to JOOLA for admitting they did this and, part of it, the reason was for the performance. It preloads some tension into the core, and
Makes sense.
And it makes a more powerful paddle. And I think that probably most other companies that didn't switch over to uncompressed cores, probably, especially at the beginning of this year and onward, knew what they were doing. The company gave them an option. Hey, do you want us to compress these cores? And they were like, yeah, I want to get more power and pop out of my paddle. Also probably knowing that the paddle was going to break quicker, So, I don't think it's necessarily unethical. I think the use life of a paddle, everybody knows, short of, a small subset of players who play with a paddle for a year or more, it's typically for me, it's about 3 months before the grit wears down and I want to replace the paddle. I think that's probably a good average for most people. They don't hang on to a paddle for more than 3 months. For you, it's like 2 weeks. You're a fickle one, Eddie.
Yeah, well.
No, there's so many good paddles out there, you just can't decide. But yeah, I think, so back to the point, I don't necessarily think it's unethical if they were kind of pre-planning this, like, okay, yeah, it's more susceptible to breakage, but you get better performance out of it. But we don't think it's going to break for X amount of months, which at that time the paddle is going to be irrelevant and the other components will break down also. So I think that's probably what paddle companies were trying to land on. It's just that JOOLA is the first to admit, yes, that was by design. The cores were being crushed. All of that to say, 3Ss are not crushed. And several other thermoform paddles on the market today are also not compressed and pre-crushed. We know, like the Ronbus, not the Pulsar, that was their original thermoform, but their Nova was definitely not pre-crushed. Remember, we dissected those and it looked pristine. 6.0 was early to adopt the non-compressed cores, and as a result, they've now increased their warranty to 12 months for their paddles because they have so little breakage of their thermoform paddles. On the other hand, you also see a decrease in the power of these paddles. Look at the original Pulsars and the original 6.0 Black Diamond and Double Black Diamond. The power output was much greater than the later and current iterations of those paddles because the core stopped being compressed. So, big bit of news there, I think, which again, congrats to Chris Olsen for breaking this. I got a little more information also about what JOOLA is doing with the 3Ss to differentiate them. I mean, I asked them point blank, what's the goal with the 3S? And he told me, it's like, well, to get it to meet the specifications of the UPA. So the 3S is UPA approved. And those specifications right now, they don't have the exit velocity test yet. So it's all about the deflection test. And they have a more rigorous deflection test than does USAP. It's different. So they press weight into it and keep adding weight until it deflects a certain amount versus USAP, which sets the weight at a certain amount and measures the flex. It's a little bit different way to, but anyway, it's more rigorous in the UPA for deflection. So they wanted to meet that because their Gen-3s were failing that test based on the new rules, which were rolled out not too long ago. So they had to make it more muted, right? So to do that, they stopped compressing the cores. Another thing they did was to treat the foam. So the foam is still the same thickness for this propulsion core. So you have the edge foam like all thermoform paddles, and then you have that interior layer of foam inside the edge foam, which goes down from the top to close to the bottom of the lateral edges of the paddles. They didn't reduce the thickness of the foam at all. So this is the same thickness in there. And we'll look at some x-rays later and talk about that.
The thickness across the face, not the depth of the...
Exactly, right. So if you cut it open like a sandwich or x-ray it and flat, then you can see, it's like 10 to 12 millimeters is the average thickness, which is the same as it was
inside the edge foam.
Inside the edge foam, which is the same as it was for the Gen-3s. But they do treat the foam, and the foam isn't any different, but they treat it differently for the 3Ss and post-treatment. So they spray something on it that basically makes it less flexible and makes it shrink a little bit. And so they dig out channels to put this foam in. They spray it in, or I don't know if it's sprayed in or how it gets in there, but it does expand. And he was saying that this expansion of the foam is unpredictable, right? So that was another reason why the QC on the Gen-3s wasn't the best, which JOOLA recognized. There was a lot of core crushing going on, or core breaking, core corruption, before it was delisted. But they wanted to shrink that foam because in places, given that it's unpredictable, it was actually pressing into the polypropylene. And given, the ball action and the flexion of the polypropylene and the foam together, those were the areas where they think it was breaking, where it was more pressure on the polypropylene from the foam. So they treat the foam to shrink it up a little bit. So it actually, there's a little bit of separation between the foam and the polypropylene, which is odd to me. It seems like that might be an area for prone to break more, given that the only thing holding that area together is the facing material. Yeah. But, this is something they think about, they thought about, and they're addressing QCSU, so I imagine they're probably onto something. All this to say that I also asked him, do you think the 3Ss are less prone to core breakage than the Gen-3s? And he said, absolutely, because A, the cores are not compressed, and B, this new foam treatment is reducing the thickness of the foam, causing less pressure on the
Were you able to ask
polypropylene.
about what they anticipate as a break-in for these new paddles?
I did. You read my mind, Eddie. So the next question was break-in period. Do they think it will break in these 3Ss? And he said, yes, not as much as the Gen-3s did, but he did say point blank, he's like, we think that the stock paddles we know that they start more muted, less powerful than the Gen-3s, but the break-in period will take it up to the level of the stock Gen-3s before they started breaking in. And then it'll stop. It's not going to get any more powerful than a brand new off-the-shelf Gen-3. So that was his words. I don't know I don't know what that means in terms of USAP. They may never intend on getting these approved at USAP, but at least for UPA, they are approved, and that's that.
Well, kudos to JOOLA for even picking up the phone and talking to you and to Chris and to others. A lot of companies aren't willing to do that.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
Good for them.
And, I appreciate his candidness, and he answered my questions. I asked him a few questions that he wasn't able to answer for various reasons, lawsuit pending and intellectual property and that sort of thing. But he was very open. So I do appreciate that. So thank you.
You want
All
to
right.
talk about how they play?
Let's talk about how they play. So you had the Hyperion and the Magnus, or did you have a Magnus? I can't remember.
I had Perseus, Magnus, and Hyperion.
Okay. And I had a Hyperion and the Scorpius, right?
Yeah.
And then that was over the past week, and then we played together today and mixed and matched all together.
Yep.
What are your overall thoughts of those paddles?
Just as you said, it's a detuned Gen 3.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the break-in is happening kind of pretty dynamically. I've only played with these for a couple of outings, and already I can tell a difference in the Hyperion, which is what I mostly focused on. Mm-hmm. I played with all the paddles, but I wanted to play with one more than the others just to see what the break-in would be, and it's happening for sure.
Okay.
I could tell in feel, but I could also tell in sound. The sound is kind of gone from here to down here.
Okay.
Which is it's a nicer sound, but
yeah,
I'm curious to see how far this break-in will go.
Yeah. Yeah, I've not noticed break-in with mine yet. I just haven't. I've played maybe 5 games before you and I met today. But definitely more muted, less powerful. It still has the foamy sound. It's kind of clunky, better sound, I'd say, than straight up polypropylene. But the sound is definitely not as deep as the Gen-3s stock when they first started either. Not yet, but it probably will eventually get there as things loosen up in the core. I would say the feel of the ball off the face is stiffer than the Gen-3s. It doesn't have as much trampoline effect or the diving board effect.
Yeah.
But it still has a pretty decent sweet spot. I'd say the sweet spot maybe slightly less stock than the Gen-3s just because things are a little tighter in there. But I imagine the sweet spot's going to widen up as it breaks in a bit.
I was not feeling great about the sweet spot on the 3 models that I had, but all 3 models I had were elongated, more or less.
Right.
When I played with your Scorpius, it felt much different in terms of sweet spot. I was able to generate a lot more from various places on the face, which is exactly what you want, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you notice that as well?
Yeah. I played with the person. I think it's just an issue of me being used to standard and wide body now, or even hybrid. When I played with the Mod TA15 after I bought it, I was like, the sweet spot doesn't feel quite as large as what I remember. And then I went back and played with the Perseus. I was like, okay, it's the same. And it was just because I was used to wider paddles with wider sweet spots. So maybe that's the only issue. But I do feel like the sweet spot is ever so slightly smaller on the 3Ss than the Gen-3s to start with. I think it'll eventually get there. But it's still a big sweet spot. I'd like to compare it to the Ronbus in a second because we'll get there, but the sweet spot in particular. So don't let me forget. But we also brought out other power paddles to compare it to. So I brought out the Gen-3 Scorpius Perseus to compare the 3Ss to. I brought out the Ronbus Ripples, and I brought out the Gearbox Pro Power.
And the Alpha.
And the Alpha, yeah, well, one of those, the Scorpius was an Alpha because I had broken my Gen-3 Colin Johns, right? All right, so playing with those side by side today, I definitely noticed a power difference between the Gen-3 JOOLAs and the new 3Ss, you know? And by the way, when I was playing with the 3S, I played with several games with it, was it yesterday? Yeah. And I really enjoyed it, and actually I think I would prefer the 3S over the Gen-3s because it is more controllable and I'm able to swing a little more freely. And just, yeah, the control issue, there are control issues with power paddles. You just can't escape it. And yeah, you can bridge that gap a little bit with the technology, but the power output of the Gen-3s was so great that going through the transition zone was a little bit sketchy, right? Pop-ups were an issue. I didn't have that kind of issue. So I feel like the 3S does strike a good balance between power and control, at least for me.
Yeah, I think if you were struggling with the Gen-3s on control and blocks and resets and that kind of thing, this could be your paddle.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that definitely there's more muted. And I ran the metrics on it. You can look at my database. They do fall kind of at the PaddleTech Bantam range in terms of power output.
So
and
top 10?
Yeah.
Ish?
Yeah. So I think the firepower metric for the Gen-3s is 94 and above. And the 3Ss are, I think, 90 and below, which is where the PaddleTech Bantams
How does that
fall.
break out between power and pop?
So the firepower metric is a average of power and pop.
Right.
But it differs for each paddle shape. So the Perseus, the elongated ones are more powerful, less poppy, and the shorter ones are poppy and less powerful.
That's kind of my takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But do you have a favorite of the shapes?
So far, I'd have to say the Scorpius.
Yeah, me too.
What's annoying to me, though, is that between the 16 and the 14s, the grips are different. You know, they're fatter on the 16s than they are on the 14s, and that's annoying to me that I have to pick a paddle if I prefer a certain grip size, based on the core thickness.
I agree. It goes back to our discussions last week, predictions for future paddles. That's the low hanging fruit for paddle companies. It's just do a solid mold for a handle and standardize it across your paddles. I realize there's issues because if you separate the face from the handle and it doesn't go through, you're going to have issues with necks breaking, which is what happened on the original Hyperion. But you can still carry the core through or not and have a thermoform seam connecting the two, which is, I'm sure there's a way, but yes, please standardize the handles.
But I love the sweet spot on this. Out of all the paddles, I was able to work the ball best with this one, I felt like. Hand speed was up for me with this paddle, which makes sense given its shorter length.
Right.
All good things.
Yeah. one more thing on the handle before we move on is I took the stock grip off and just put one over grip on it. And I like the feel of that because they're kind of beefy handles to begin with on the 16s. 14s, not so much. They're thinner. But the 16s all have, I'd say, more than 4.25-inch circumference.
Agree.
Anyway, recommended for people that like thinner
I wish we
handles.
had the 14 millimeter, if only to have that grip selection to try out.
Yeah. I do like the look of the paddle. I mean, the face isn't too obnoxious. There's a little too many YOLAs, 4 on the paddle total. But
That's better than 13.
better than 13. But yeah, just kind of a subdued look. It's and they do have the gradient, which I'm sure a lot of people are going to like. But to me, I'm with you, Eddie. To me, it looks like somebody took a spray paint can and just sprayed the sides
ran out
of
of paint.
it. Yeah, I ran out of paint. But there you go. Scorpius is my favorite by far.
Okay.
Also, yeah, it's a good playing paddle. Like if we were not considering price or durability, I would highly recommend this paddle to most people. I do think the durability is going to be better on these, but we don't know until we keep playing with them.
I'd like to have 2 weeks of solid play with it.
Yeah.
Before I say
Yeah,
this
for sure.
is the paddle to get.
For sure. All right, so we got a chance to play these side by side with power paddles. So we already mentioned that the Gen-3s are much more powerful. Also compared it to the Ronbus Ripple, both the R1 elongated and R2 standard shape. I hit the Scorpius standard shape right next to the R1 back to back. Basically exactly the same shape. And I noticed that the 3S was more muted than the Ripple. And honestly, I couldn't tell much of a difference between my Ripple, which is weighted up, and a Gen 3 Scorpius, which also had about similar edge weight on it, which leads me to believe there's a little bit of a break-in happening with the R2. I didn't notice it. I saw Chris's mention of the R1 that he and Isaac have been hitting with is definitely becoming more powerful, like noticeably too much. I didn't notice that with the R2, and today when I came in, I was like, I don't think that mine's breaking in yet. Maybe it will. But comparing it side by side with a JOOLA Gen-3 Scorpius, I do think that it's slightly breaking in. I don't think it had quite as much power, but if you blindfolded me and played with both of them, I'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference.
They are pretty comparable in feel. I've been playing with mine solidly, both R1 and R2, solidly for a couple of weeks now. And I'd be hard-pressed to define any sort of break-in.
Okay. Yeah. But your perception of it started hotter than my perception of the stock paddles.
I would say so.
Yeah. You put them right away like Gen 3 level.
Gen 3 pop, yep.
Yeah. How about power? Same?
Power, pretty close to the same. Maybe sneaking up to Gen 3, but not quite there.
Okay. Yeah. So I put mine in between the Paddle Techs and the Gen 3s. And I did notice the same kind of power pop trend as you. Maybe we're at the same spot in the end, given that separation between power and pop. If you had to do the combined firepower metric for the stock Ripple compared to the stock Gen 3s, where would you place it?
Probably a touch higher.
Than the Gen 3s? Wait, which one is higher?
It's really close to the Gen 3s. Maybe a touch higher just because I feel like the pop on the Ripple is,
Oh, really?
is pretty aggressive.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, the mine was definitely lower, my perception of it, out of the box.
But they're very similar in play.
Now, I would definitely agree with you. After it's broken in a little bit and comparing apples to apples, so weighted up. One issue is I knew mine was heating up, but I was also adding weight, and that's going to add power. So I haven't taken the weight off to play with it again to see if it's still exactly the same as.
But I was adding weight to my Gen 3 anyway, so.
Yeah, today I played with it compared to a weighted up Gen 3, and it was really close. Maybe a tad more muted, but not much. Anyway, so there's that. And then we pull out the old Gearbox Pro Power, or I did anyway. And none of these paddles are even close to the power of that Gearbox Pro Power. That's broken in. It's the original elongated 14 mil Pro Power elongated. That thing that's a cannon, man. I think I hit one serve in out of 15.
It's
when
a
we were
cannon
playing.
for the quarter size sweet spot that it has.
Yeah, that's the first thing I noticed was, oh my God, either it's super responsive if you hit it in the sweet spot, or it's dead on the edges. Like that sweet spot drop off is so much more noticeable on
It is.
the Gearbox, the original Pro Power. Now,
Right.
I do think they improved it a bit on the Ultimate. There's definitely an improved sweet spot, but. Come on, Gearbox, give us a wide body or something.
Bring us the wide
That's
body.
going to be fun. I think they're working on it. I think they had intended on doing that. So it's going to be hard to beat the Ripple, though. Let's talk about the sweet spot on the Ripple compared to the Scorpius. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm going to have to give the nudge to the Ripple
All day for me.
all day.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not to say that the Scorpius Gen 3 or Gen 3S sweet spot is bad. It's good.
What's great about the Ripple is, the stock swing weight is so low. It's like 105, 106, something in there.
Yeah.
There's so much capacity to add weight to expand the twist weight and swing weight.
Yeah.
Not swing weight, but twist weight and the sweet spot. So much. I mean, you can get it up to 7.5 on twist weight, whereas there
Yeah.
not much capacity on the JOOLAs to do that.
That's a good point. And something that I should have mentioned right away is the stock. I'd say they're very comparable, the Scorpius and the Ripple, but you're not going to play the Ripple stock because it is so lightweight. You're going to add weight to it. How many for the R1, you added?
I've got 9 grams on each side.
Yeah, on each side.
Yeah, and not low either.
No, all the way up the side of the paddle. And it still feels very manageable. So
The swing weight on that with 9 grams is still only 115.
still way under 120.
It's nuts.
That is nuts. So that's really cool that Ronbus was able to make such a powerful paddle with a big sweet spot stock and so low of a swing weight. I mean, it's like a tabula rasa for whatever modifications you want to
It's crazy.
add to it. So once you weight it up to the same twist weight and swing weight as a Scorpius, the sweet spot on the R2 Ripple is so much better in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you can even just test it in your house, just bouncing a ball. So one of the issues we've already talked about with the propulsion core technology is it's like a diving board, right? So you've got the edge foam, you've got an interior layer inside that edge foam of foam going to about here, and then polypropylene in the center. So as a result, the polypropylene serves as like a diving board. And the closer you get to the edge of that diving board, the end of that diving board, the more response you're going to get. But the typical sweet spot, yes, you get good ball response, but not much more than a Gen 2 thermoform paddle on the traditional sweet spot. But if you hit it further up, right around here is the real sweet spot on the JOOLA. So you get diminishing returns as you go down. And I'd say down here, there's not much response at all. It doesn't feel very good to hit it
It's
down
pretty
here.
dead.
Versus the Ripple, which I know it's not this big, it's probably a little bigger than my fist, but you get a lot more consistency across the face and a bigger area for the sweet spot on the Ripple for sure. So bouncing the ball, like balls, you get good response all the way down to about here. And for the Scorpius, it's much, much higher where that drop off starts happening.
Yep. And by the way, here's that R1 setup for me with that 9 grams on each side. It sneaks down the face a little bit here, but for the most part, it's on the sides.
All on the edges, yeah.
Yeah,
So
and again, that's only a 115 swing weight,
Would-
so it feels swingable.
I think that's a smart weight setup for that shape too, because it starts with a very narrow sweet spot following the dimensions of the paddle
Yep.
at 7.5 inches wide. So putting the weight up at the widest spot of the paddle increases the twist weight. So I played with that today. I think it's fun. It doesn't feel too heavy, and the power is pretty wicked.
So if you were to compare stock R2 to stock Scorpius, I think the sweet spot might be in the favor of the JOOLA, but there's just
Yeah,
no
you're probably
room
right.
to do anything with the JOOLA. So
Yeah.
ultimately, you got to go with the Ripple if sweet spot is your primary concern.
Just based on the twist weight alone, the stock Scorpius has such a higher twist weight because it's just a heavier paddle.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you slap on 3 or more grams on each side, that opens up the ripple in a big way. Makes it.
I've gotten
a
so
lot of
used
fun.
to dropping and dinking with the ripple and paddles like that it's almost second nature for me to play that soft game with those paddles now, even though they're not considered
Right.
control paddles.
So, Eddie, if you had to choose one or the other over the other, would you choose the Ripple R2 or the Yellow Scorpius 3S?
Well, I haven't gotten my hands on the Anna Bright yet,
That's true.
so
On the
let's
14 mil.
defer a decision on that right now.
That'll be a fun comparison because the Ripple is a 14 mil.
Right.
Yeah. I think I'm still going to lean toward the Ripple, just on the basis of predicting where the sweet spot is based on how the Gen 3.
I do like the sort of that pocketed feel when you strike the ball of the Ripple.
Yeah.
Like you said, the Yola feels like very stiff, very, Gen 2-ish in terms of responsiveness of the face to the ball. I'm getting to love that Ripple just, feels like strings on the ball.
Yeah.
I hate to use that cliche, but this of all paddles feels that way.
I will say, though, if the Ripple heats up
Yeah.
much more than where it is now, I think it's going to be too powerful for me.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Our paddle to talk about, we discussed briefly the Honolulu J2Ti 2 weeks ago, but I wanted to bring that up again because I've been hitting with it a little more, and I'm really enjoying it. So much so that I may review it. May do a dedicated review of the J2Ti. Ti referring to titanium, which we now...
So I think on the prior podcast where we talked about that, I said that it was my favorite of the Honolulu Pickleball
You sure
Company
did.
paddles. Would you say that today?
I'm going to withhold that judgment until I play with it. I need a little more time with it.
Okay.
But we hit with it.
You played well with it today.
Yeah, we hit with it today. I don't know if you actually did side-by-side with the J2K. I brought the
did not.
J2K and I played with them back and forth a few times. And I'm really liking what I'm feeling from the J2Ti. So, again, that's the PET threads going through that woven carbon fiber cloth on the surface, called titanium because of the coloring. But, I mean, comparing this, apples to apples, comparing this directly to the J2K, it is a softer feel. The ball response off the face is more plush. But like other titanium paddles, it's a springier feel also. So you get kind of a little bit of the best of both worlds in terms of control from the plushness, pocketing the ball, a little bit more dwell time with the ball hitting the surface, together with, if you swing it a little harder, you're going to get a little more response with
I was getting some shapeshifter vibes.
shape. Yeah. I'm pretty sure they don't have a layer of fiberglass in this, but I'm not entirely sure. I've got to go look up the specs or
That could be the
talk to
polyester
Jam.
given that bit of...
I think there is something to the polyester threads in there, causing more dwell time and causing just a different response. I don't know if it's actually from directly hitting the the polyester threads, or just a loosening up of that 3K woven surface, given that the threads are going through. I don't know. But like other titanium paddles, it plays with that set of performance attributes. So springy and plush together. So I do feel like the J2K definitely feels stiffer. I need a little more time with it, but I'm going to give this the edge in overall firepower. But like a lot of other titanium PET paddles, the firepower skews on the side of power over pop, which I generally tend to like in paddles. That's why I liked most of the Kevlar paddles, because with full swings you still get good power, but with shorter strokes it's a little more muted. You get less pop-ups, more controllability. I felt that trend in this as well, but not as much as in other titanium paddles like the Shogun. I feel is a good example of a really muted pop. This still had enough pop to be offensive at the kitchen. Or the Neonic Flare is another good example of something with good power but really low pop, which is a good thing for various players. But this one, I feel like overall, if you combine those two scores into the firepower metric, it's going to be higher than the original J2K. But it still feels as controllable as the J2K. So good things so far from
Some people have talked about
J2Ti.
the branding of this paddle and others from this company as being maybe a little bit too much.
Yeah, like the whole
I
sword.
tend to agree with that.
I do think the sword motif underneath the titanium doesn't really work. I mean, it's okay. I'm sure some people would like it, but it kind of breaks up the sword, and you're just like, you got to position it a certain way to see it in its entirety. I think that is enough.
There's a lot going on this paddle.
Yeah. So maybe just take out the center sword entirely. I don't know. I still would give this the edge over the J2K. Ooh, yeah. I still like the look of this, just in terms of the threads. When you kind of get a close-up of it.
Yeah, that's a very cool look.
They look very nice.
Absolutely.
Looks a little higher quality, too.
So potentially a review coming up.
Potentially, yeah. We will see. I need a few more days with it.
All right. Are we done with paddles?
We're done with that. Well, not really. We're going to deep dive next. We're going to talk about
Thought that was our
more
deep dive.
paddles. Right. All right. So I did find a local a local chiropractor office that is gracious enough to allow me into X-ray paddles. So thank you to everybody who replied in the comment section and who reached out by email. There are several doctors who play pickleball who reached out and who were like, hey, I'll let you use my equipment. You know, just need to ship me the paddles. And I almost did that with one gentleman. I need to follow up with him. But turns out, and thank you to Tony Spinuzzi, a local player here, he hooked me up with his chiropractor after asking them if I could come in and X-ray paddles. So just down the street in Westminster, it's like 15-minute drive. I brought in 10 paddles and X-rayed them. And I will start using the X-rays of the paddles in my reviews. But I'll show some B-roll footage. That was the first thing to turn me on to. I took in the JOOLA 3Ss and compared those, as well as the Gen-3s, compared those side by side in the X-rays, and the foam is the same width and thickness and those, okay? So there are other paddles that I X-rayed. I'll kind of save it. Tease it a little bit, so I X-rayed the ripples, obviously. It's interesting stuff going on in the ripple.
Anything you want to talk about there?
No, I think I'll save that for the review.
All right.
And I'll put up the one.
It is very interesting, though.
Yeah, it is.
Just to tease that a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know how much I can say, but anyway, I also X-rayed the Ace Heart, so that's the one. Similar technology to the JOOLA Gen-3s. So there's edge foam with a layer of foam inside of that, but that layer of foam goes all the way down into the handle, right? And it's a really nice X-ray of that paddle. Shows clearly what they're claiming is in there. So and then polypropylene inside of that.
So are you able to learn anything different than from cutting up a paddle, other than to save the paddle?
I mean, not really, but it's a way to non-destructively examine what's inside of a paddle. And they even have a little scale on there so you can measure the width of foam or whatever, or the polypropylene cell size to the millimeter. You know, it's pretty accurate that way. So that's exciting to me, you know. I also X-rayed the Paddletech Bantam, and there's the two
very concentrated
metal balls inside the perimeter weighting they put in really showed up. I want to talk about the Ripple, but I can't. You saw the stuff in the Ripple. Yeah. Fun stuff. So that's exciting to me because I'm a total nerd, and I will incorporate those into my reviews.
Awesome.
All right. Another modification to the Ripple for me. So I started stock, obviously, and I had a few modifications, including up to a slice cap at the base with some perimeter weighting. Also, I used that slice cap. I liked it, but ultimately I took it out. Like this particular paddle needed it, and I don't think that for me any standard or wide body paddle would benefit from a slice cap. I think for me most elongated paddles, if not all, are going to benefit from that, lowering the balance point. And some hybrid paddles will benefit from it, like the Chorus Shapeshifter. But I was reluctant to put it on the Honolulu J2Ti because the stock balance point of the T2i is J2Ti is lower than the Chorus shapeshifter. So I did enjoy the slice cap on the shapeshifter. I don't think I would enjoy it on this. I'm starting to find the balance point where I do think it needs to be lowered and not below that. So I took it off. I do enjoy just a little bit more head heaviness in the R2 Ripple. It feels better to me. I don't think it needs to be so low. It doesn't need to be at that 0th percentile for me to feel like I can wield it. And it's such a light paddle anyway.
Right.
So my third modification of it, took the slice cap off and left 6 grams of tungsten, the lighter weight tungsten, 0.5 grams per inch, stretching from the neck up onto the sides, right? Because it's really traditional setup for the lead tape or tungsten tape, which I think that serves me well. I might eventually move it up on the edges like you've done R1. That might be better, but this is my third mod. Anyway, I ran the metrics on it again, and I'll show the charts and the B-roll. But what you can see is some interesting trends and things that we kind of figured out already, but it's really apparent in all the different modifications of the ripples. We have the stock, we have the 3 mods. Now, the first chart I'm showing here has, for bars, it has the hand speed score. And again, the hand speed score is a cumulative conglomeration of the hand speed index that Brian Fitzpatrick of Graffiti developed, actually measuring the watts to swing a paddle 180 degrees. So the lower that is, the more maneuverable, and the higher it is, the heavier, less maneuverable the paddle is. So you can see, just looking at the hand speed score, the Ripple R2 starts off really low. Mm-hmm. And this is if you get up to 100%, that's like, compared to all of the other paddles in my database, it's the heaviest. 0% compared to all the others is the lightest, most maneuverable. So this is below 10%. With modification 1, which was basically 11 grams of tungsten total on the neck and the sides of the paddle, there was a pretty significant boost in the hand speed score. So it became less maneuverable, got close to 30%. That's still pretty low compared to the paddle database in general. The modification 2, which was I removed a little bit at 3 and 9 and then added the slice cap. The hand speed score improved, or it got lower, so the hand speed was quicker for that. And then modification 3, taking the slice cap off, leaving the weight on the sides, the hand speed is negligibly reduced. So it's basically the same as mod 2. And then I showed 3 different actual hand speed indices on this. So wrist, elbow, and shoulder. You can see the wrist and elbow movements mirror each other pretty well. So they also mirror the hand speed score pretty well. So they start low, went up to the highest point with the mod 1, down to the lowest point with mod 2, and then equalized with mod 3. Versus the shoulder movement, which peaks actually with mod 2 because the shoulder movement, so that's this movement going 180 degrees, mostly with the shoulder. You're carrying the static weight at that point, and none of that static weight is playing off each other to help the paddle flip. So at that point, static weight is the most important factor for the hand speed score.
Right.
So I just thought that was kind of cool to see how modifying a paddle, dropping the balance point, but can affect the hand speed overall. And as we've talked about several times now, dropping the balance point yet increasing the static weight of the paddle can still give you a more maneuverable paddle. So the heaviest static weight in these 4 modifications is actually the quickest hand speed because it also has the lowest balance point. Okay, so moving on to performance, I also measured power pop and the combined metrics of firepower for each of these modifications. And you have that chart, Eddie?
Yep.
Okay. So you can see that the original R2 starts out between 91 and 92% for power and pop, so pretty close. And then the firepower goes up with mods 1 and 2 incrementally, and then drops with mod 3 down to about where it was for mod 2. So the takeaway point with this is that, yes, adding a slice cap to a paddle can increase power and pop because especially with wristy movements, because it allows you to swing the paddle a little faster, and it's putting more weight behind the paddle. So that's benefiting in terms of the power. And then taking the step off, the power dropped a bit. Now, one issue I want to be able to take out of this is the break-in. So I do think we're seeing some of this increase is related to the break-in period, but I don't think there's actually much in here because if you look at the Mod 1 and the Mod 3, so skip over Mod 2, the difference between that is 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, they're dead on.
They're dead on, but there is less weight in the Mod 3 compared to the Mod 1, 6 grams less. So they're dead on, but if they were dead on, then less weight should have meant less power. So I do think you're seeing just a little bit of break in terms of more power for the paddle as the weeks go on, Eddie.
What do you think about flipping your hand speed calculation so that a lower number is less maneuverable?
I thought about that, but it
Seems
also
more intuitive to think of a high hand speed metric as being more maneuverable.
It's been frustrating to talk about it and show the metrics. Yeah, but I don't think that's the smart move, and because when we're talking about swing weight, it's the same way, and twist weight as well. So swing weight, like a lowered swing weight, is going to be more maneuverable, and lower twist weight as well. Same for balance point. Lower balance point's more maneuverable. I don't know. I'll think about it, but you're right. It's confusing.
One less thing to think about for my small caveman brain.
Oh, you've got the higher IQ out of anybody in this room, including Juju.
Well, honestly, John, this is one of the fun things we do is just tinker around with different setups to see what the impact would be.
Mm-hmm.
And that you have metrics that kind of back up the intuitive side of it,
Yeah.
I think is fascinating.
Yeah. Like I said, I wish that, or I hope that eventually I will be able to do COR here at home in my garage and refine the method. It's not perfect, the whole serving for power and drop volley punches for pop, but it's getting what we need at this point.
So if there are any air cannon tinkerers out there,
yes,
reach out.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to Q&A.
Questions of the week.
Do you want to ask the first one?
Patrick Bridgman, T3H. How difficult are the ripples to control versus the JOOLA Gen-3s? We talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, we did. We already kind of
Any
discussed this.
overarching themes that you want to summarize with this?
I mean, first of all, the sweet spot on the Ripple, better, in my opinion, than the Gen-3s for the reasons we just discussed. It's just more rounded. It goes lower on the paddle face, less of a diving, more of a trampoline effect on the Ripple compared to the Gen-3. And yeah, I think the control aspects, even though it's a powerful paddle and control does suffer, I feel like it strikes a really good balance between those two. It's still controllable even with the power. That being said, if it gets much more powerful, I'm going to lose the control of it. And even where it's at right now, going to a tournament might be iffy. Getting the yips, getting stiff.
Yeah.
I would probably stick my core shapeshifter in my bag as a backup right now.
I think that's smart. It's a good way to diversify your setup is to just make sure you have a paddle you're familiar with that is more control oriented. Even a J2Ti would be a good second paddle to have in your bag.
For sure.
When those times when you're just blocking stuff out of bounds all the time, or you're just up against a big banger where you're kind of struggling with softening up the ball.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on comparing the Ripple to the Gen-3?
For control,
Yeah.
I would put it in favor of the Ripple. For me, sweet spot equals control. And so, when you're blocking in for resets and dropping, just having that confidence of a larger sweet spot is huge. I can't stress that enough.
Agreed. However, if we compared the Ripple to the 3S, I would give the advantage to the 3S in terms of control, at least where the power levels are at right now.
Yeah.
Just because it is
the
more...
Colin John Scorpius would be a really nice control-oriented option.
Yeah.
Balancing out that power very nicely.
Yeah. Despite the sweet spot issues, not issues, sweet spot on the Gen-3s and the Gen-3Ss is good. It's just exceptional on the Ripple. Maybe better than any other paddle I played with. But the more muted power in general is going to cause less pop-ups for the 3Ss. All right, good question.
Better to not get into a situation where you have to do something that might lead to a pop-up.
That's true.
It's so easy.
Work on your footwork more than your grip strength.
There you go. You want to take the next one, John?
Sure. This one is from JDTD. 2 questions. One, is the Pikkl Hurricane Pro still on your radar for a full review? He's mostly interested in the mods for the 14 millimeters, so he can compare that with what he's done. And then second question, what treatments ultimately cured your plantar fasciitis? All right, so the first question is, yes, I do intend to review the Pikkl Hurricane Pro. I'm actually going to do that this week. I'm going to combine that review with the Neonic Flare Titanium. I think they're the exact same shape in the paddle, maybe just a tiny millimeter difference or point something millimeters difference in the two. And they're both under $150 with code. And I think they're definitely, the Hurricane needs more attention. It's a solid performer. They're both good performers. Neonic Flare is newer, so it's getting some attention. But I want to bring light to these two as alternatives in the standard shape paddle category for a all-court paddle in the Neonic Flare and the Hurricane 14 millimeter, and a control-oriented paddle in the Hurricane Pro 16 millimeter. And I think all of these are great paddles. They serve different purposes. And, there's the pickleball space for standard and wide bodies is expanding. We've got the 11-6-24 lineup, the Monarch lineup, which covers nearly all bases. And these two paddles, actually 3 if you're counting the 16 and 14 Hurricane, fit in that range between the Jelly Bean and the Monarch all court, but with slightly different performance metrics. So, yeah, I'm excited to get that review out, and I will be reviewing the Hurricane Pro.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Plantar fasciitis?
Oh, thank you. I almost skipped through that one. So ultimately what cured it is busting the tendon. So I busted through the plantar fascia tendon. I broke it and snapped it and collapsed on the court one day when I tried an Ernie. It popped. However, that is one of the quickest healing tendons in the human body, apparently. And I went to the doctor. He did the MRI, and he's like, "That's the best thing you could have done," because I was suffering with plantar fasciitis for months before that, and I would rest for a week or two, and then get back on the court, and it'd flare up again. It was driving me crazy. So the doctor was like, "With your chronic level of plantar fasciitis, I probably would have recommended surgical breakage and regrowth of the tendon to begin with." But you did it yourself by injury. That is not to say that I would recommend people just keep playing like I did, like an idiot, until you actually break a tendon.
Was this at the pub?
That was at the pub. Do you remember that day?
I do.
It was like a mini tournament we were having.
I was shocked at how fast you came back because, it was probably only a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
When I saw you again. I mean, you weren't at full strength.
Right.
I'm like, what are you even doing here?
Right. And to this day, I haven't suffered, knock on wood, with plantar fasciitis. And I have more flexibility in that foot than my other foot. I've got horrible flexibility in both, but it opened up a little more flexibility in that foot.
Nice.
Yeah. So there you go. But my recommendation would be, if you've just started to get plantar fasciitis, take a break. Don't keep pushing yourself until it doesn't hurt anymore. And if it starts flaring up again, take another break.
John, no pickleball player is ever going to take that piece of advice. That is lame.
All right, just go until you break it.
There you go. Bam.
No. But I think the same thing happened to Tyson McGuffin. He went until his broke, and now he's better off.
I did not realize that it was so quick to heal. That's interesting.
It was more like
You'd think
4
it would
weeks.
heal on its own without breaking.
Yeah. I was back dinking after a couple weeks, but it was more like 4 weeks until I was kind of
that's
running. And then I think after 2 months, I was good as new.
I remember telling somebody who was there, won't see him again for a while. Thank God, I'm sick of his serve.
That was in our early days. We'd
spin serve.
That's right. The old spin serve days. Yeah. Good times, Eddie.
Yes, sir.
That's the end of our podcast.
Oh, my goodness. That's a good one.
Yeah, another good one.
All right.
We're getting decent at this. We got a flow going.
It's almost like we're professionals.
I don't know about that. Got any
right, folks.
pithy closing thoughts for us?
We'll see you next week.
All right. Sounds good, Eddie.
All right.
Next time.